Hi everyone, I hope you are doing well and that your first week of classes are also nicely winding down. This will be a rather brief screencast lesson just highlighting some of the major points from Dr. Ken Hardy's video entitled Working Across Differences in Collaborations and Partnerships. So if you remember in the introductory video that I provided you all with on Wednesday, I talked about how before we start to learn about people from different cultures, from different backgrounds and social locations in the world, that we will spend a good bit of time really understanding our own identities, really understanding our own social locations, and how that influences how we make sense of the world. And so I thought this video and lecture from Dr. Ken Hardy, who, if you didn't pick up, is a family therapist and scholar. I thought this video and lecture for him would be a good way for us to start having these types of conversations. So when we talk about social identity, in this principle of locating our social identities, what we're referring to is how we make sense of ourselves in relation to our membership in various groups. Our social identities influence how we make sense of the world around us. So for example, and these are absolutely just a few of my social identities, I have multiple identities or selves if I were to use the language of Dr. Ken Hardy. I consider myself to be a Black woman, Christian, heterosexual, cisgender, presently able-bodied, but I'm also educated. I'm a college graduate. I have sound mental health. I'm also a college lecturer. I'm a therapist. All these various ways that influence the ways in which I make sense of not only myself, but also the ways in which I understand others has a lot to do with my own social location and my own social identities. And I think Dr. Hardy really presents it in a way that is very descriptive, in a way that paints a very clear picture. So I'll use his words. We base reality on who we are. We use ourselves as a reference point and believe we're right. Who we are dictates what we see and how we see. We first have to become acquainted with who we are before attempting to form a collaborative. And so for the purposes of this specific video that you watched from Dr. Hardy, he's lecturing to a group of different professionals about how to build effective partnerships and collaborations despite differences in background, despite differences in social locations, ethnicities, so on and so forth. How do we begin to partner with people in a way that is effective, in a way that is meaningful, when we come from very, very different places? And so his entire talk is centered around the importance of first knowing yourself before we can even start to do that work about building bridges in hopes of understanding others. So Dr. Hardy really encourages us to think about ourselves multi-dimensionally, where we don't have one self, but that we represent multiple selves at the same time, simultaneously. One way that we can think about our multiple selves is in terms of subjugated and privileged selves. So our subjugated selves refers to those aspects of our identity that are oppressed and marginalized. Our privileged selves refers to those aspects of our identity that have an advantage in society compared to some others. So this isn't sort of an idea that is simply black and white, but there's great nuance, there's great complexity in terms of who we are, in terms of what we represent. So using the examples of the social identities that I presented on the previous slide, I'm going to categorize those multiple selves in categories of privileged selves and category of subjugated selves. So the fact that I am Christian is a privilege in our Western society. The fact that I am presently able-bodied is a privileged position. The fact that I'm heterosexual is a privileged position. And then also cisgender. However, in terms of subjugation, being a black woman is a critical aspect of who I am that shapes my understanding of the world. In thinking about these multiple selves that we all have, it's also important to note that all selves, for lack of a better phrase, are not created equal. We can look at this list and clearly I have 4 privileged selves in comparison to 2 subjugated selves in this specific example. But the fact that I am a black woman, like these are our physical characteristics that one can visibly see, the fact that black people, the fact that women have historically been marginalized and oppressed in this country, that weighs incredibly heavy, especially in comparison to some of the privileges that I hold. So I think sometimes when people engage in this sort of activity, the inclination is to sort of compile how many selves do I have in the privileged column and how many selves do I have in the subjugated column. But that's a trap that we shouldn't fall into, because being a black woman in the sociocultural context, the oppression that is attached to those aspects of who I am are critical to my existence and critical to my lived experience. So I want to go back for a second, because what I'm going to ask you to do is to also develop your own list. You're going to take out a sheet of paper, drawing a line down the center, just as I have, creating one column for your privileged self and creating a second column for your subjugated self. And think about as many identities, social identities, as you possibly can. There is no limit. Trust me, these 6 that I've outlined here today, they are merely a starting point. I've done this exercise now probably 4 or 5 times, and each time that I do it, there are new identities that come about. There are new aspects of myself that I'm more cognizant of. So feel free to pause the screencast at this point or simply come back to it. But after you compile this list, I would like you to take a moment to review what you have compiled and to also take notice to if there are certain aspects of yourself maybe that maybe a year ago would not have been as important or relevant to your understanding of yourself as it is now. Really take notice to what comes up. Hold on to this list because you're going to need it for Monday's class when we engage in some conversation and sharing of what we compiled. The second critical aspect of Dr. Hardy's lecture that I do want to bring your attention to is this idea of self-interrogation, which really refers to this process of always consistently questioning the assumptions and biases that we always hold. Regardless of how self-aware we become, we're never a completely objective person. Dr. Hardy, for the most part, says that, objectivity doesn't really exist. We're subjective beings. We have opinions and perspectives about things that are all shaped by our social locations, all shaped by our lived experiences. It's important for us to be aware, but to not fall into this misconception that we can completely, do away with those assumptions. But two critical questions that we have to continuously wrestle with is: how does my age, my education, ethnicity, gender, class, religion, sexual orientation, geographical location, physical ability, etc., influence my beliefs about others and the world? And then secondly, what are my gaps in knowledge around issues related to multiculturalism, oppression, privileges, power, equity, etc.? Because no matter how well versed we are, there will always be gaps in our knowledge and understanding, which is why it's so important for us to hold this learner's position. And lastly, again, reiterating for Monday's class, be sure to bring your list of subjugated and privileged identities list to class, and be prepared to dedicate some time to sharing and discussing your list with others. That's it for now. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your weekend, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday at 11:15. See you then. Bye-bye.